Thank you, Mr. Oppie. It is once again nice to have everyone here today to be able to come together. We are missing a few. Mr. Kellers is still a little bit under the weather, and we miss him. And anyone else that may be missing, hopefully you're at home watching us on the web, and we still welcome you in by that way. And again, like to say welcome to all of the guests who are here today. There's a subject that for thousands of years people have been curious about, and that is the end of the world. People wonder about the end of the world. They can read some of the scriptures and they try to put their own interpretation to it. And this curiosity is always present in the minds of those that God has called in this life. And the thoughts of end times kind of rises and falls with world events. We see things going on in the world and we think, oh boy, this is it. Here it comes. Then things smooth out a little bit and we kind of kick back and like, oh, we got time. We're good. We're good. But there's always things going on in the world that fit some of the patterns. Israel, right now, a country whose history is full of war, is in the midst of a war with its neighbor. It seems like that may be coming to an end, but it never really ends for them. It's always the possibility of a surprise attack. Just last week, her neighbor to the north, their government was completely overthrown, amplifying the instability of the area around Jerusalem, Israel. The governments that are over there seem to rise and fall pretty suddenly. And there's a suddenness with which things can change everywhere in the world. We can think back to 9/11, how quickly our outlook was the very next day. How our stock market, when it opened back up, took a pretty big tumble. Very small things sometimes can escalate very quickly and affect a lot of people. Jesus mentioned several times that the end of the age would come suddenly and that it would catch people off guard. People would not be ready for it. 1 Thessalonians tell us that people will actually think that all is good. Everything's fine in the world. They have no sense of the doom that is quickly coming. 1 Thessalonians 5, starting in verse 1. 1 Thessalonians 5, starting in verse 1. We read here, "But concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you. For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night." It's going to catch many people off guard. Many people will be unprepared. Verse 3, "For when they say peace and safety, then suddenly destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape." Now, I wonder sometimes when I read this, what kind of changes will take place in the world where people will start getting a sense of security, of peace and safety. And we have here in the United States had that feeling for a long time because we have the natural borders that isolate us from a lot of things going on in the world. And we can become unaware of things that are happening around the world and how fast some things are changing. But the world's going to be caught off guard. So Paul tells us we should be aware. All right? Paul's writing is here for everybody, but he's writing to us, those that have been called throughout time and are followers of God. He tells us that we should be aware. Continuing on here in verse 4, but you, brethren, are not in darkness, so this day should overtake you as a thief. We have no excuse if we are caught off guard other than we are not paying attention. We're not doing what we should be doing. He says, you are sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. You might remember last week's sermon we talked about Christ described himself as having eyes of flame that light up the world, that light up the darkness in this world. That darkness shines as a guide for us. We're able to see things that others are not. He says, therefore, let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. So he tells us to watch. And he tells us what to watch for. Jesus gave us warnings because his disciples were very interested in the end of the age. And I think one of the reasons is because Christ talked about it so much that it was on their minds a lot. It's like, when's this all going to happen? And we'll see here in a little bit where they asked him that question, but it kind of makes me think that even in their time, they could look around at events that were going on and think, that could be now. Now, here we are many, many decades, centuries later, and we're definitely a lot closer than they were, and we can see things that perhaps they couldn't quite understand. How could there be a war that would destroy all life on earth in their time? Now, their world was a lot smaller than our world in that they didn't have as far-reaching areas as we do. But they really didn't have the means to have a battle that could wipe off all living things at that time, as we do now. But it still makes me think that they could look at the situation going on around them and think, this could be happening soon. Jesus could be returning very quickly. Even though he was there with them at the time, they were very, very interested in when would Jesus return. So Jesus warned them that before his return, mankind's evils and sufferings would dramatically increase, ending in a great tribulation, a time such as never was before and never will be again. We know it never will be again because God's going to usher in peace and safety and tranquility and God's way of life, which will lead just the opposite direction that Satan's way has taken man. But Jesus talked about a future that could be so bad that everyone who was alive would die if that time was not cut short. And that is in Matthew 24, starting in verse 21. Matthew 24, verse 21, the words of Jesus here, for then there will be a great tribulation such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved alive. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. We have reached that time in history where this is possible. Mankind has had such destructive weapons, so as if they were all turned loose at once, all living things would be destroyed. We've had that capability since, maybe late 50s on. We've had the ability with some of the weapons and bombs and things that have been created. So was Jesus talking about our time when he said that? Are we there? Are we in the end times? There are many Bible prophecies that leave no doubt that increasingly disastrous events will occur before God's direct intervention in human affairs. These terrifying prophetic occurrences will see their fulfillment at some future time. The question on everybody's mind is when. When is this going to happen? There's a lot of confusion around the timing of these prophecies. A lot of it is because of things that go on in the world, and we look at it and we think, ooh, this is it. This is big stuff. And then, as I said, time goes on. Things mellow out, get back to a sense of normal. But there are many Bible prophecies that leave no doubt increasingly disastrous events will occur. They are coming. There is a lot of confusion around the timing of these prophecies, but as we just read, we're not in darkness. It's not hidden. God reveals to us through the Bible certain vital keys that will help us place these warnings in an understandable prophetic framework if we are paying attention, if we are learning, if we are watching. And we have to let the Bible itself interpret its prophecies. There's been many people who's gone through here and has like turned something into some great math formula and has got it all figured out. And their time comes and their time goes, and it didn't happen. We have to let the Bible interpret itself. Today we're going to examine what Jesus Christ, his apostles, and the prophets really said about the days they referred to as the times of the end of the age. The time of the end is a subject that is present in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation in one form or the other. It's mentioned. When asked about the end of the age, Jesus was actually quoting Daniel the prophet. This was from Daniel 12 and verse 1, which Daniel is a book full of prophecy. You can't look at prophetic events without going back and looking at some of the prophecies of the Old Testament. But Daniel 12 verse 1, Daniel said, "At that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time." So let's look at some more of what Christ had to say concerning those end times. Let's go back here, Matthew 24. We'll back up to verse 3. We set the scene here as the disciples come up to Jesus. Jesus had just given prophecy to the people who were there. And his disciples listening to him, they're hearing all these things that everyone else is hearing. And they came to him privately, verse 3, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, and they said, "Tell us, when will these things be?" You know, they realized Jesus had just given some great prophetic events minus one thing. He didn't give them a timeline. He didn't say when it was going to happen. He just told them what was going to happen. So they came to him and said, "Tell us when. When's all this going to be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of this age?" They understood that Jesus was talking about an end of an age. And Jesus begins to answer these questions, and he starts with a warning for his disciples. It's a warning that's been passed down to the churches from that time forward, and it's a warning that is here for us today. Verse 4, Matthew 24, "And Jesus answered and said to them, 'Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many.'" So the first thing that Jesus warns us about is false religion and false teachers and those who come in Jesus' name, whether saying they are representing Jesus or whether they go so far as to say they are Jesus. And we have had people like that. David Koresh proclaimed himself to be Jesus. And obviously, when we see the things that he was doing and how he was treating his people, he wasn't even following the words of Jesus. He was setting himself up among his group, and they fell for it. The world today is just full of false religion, but this seems to be even a deeper sense of false religion. This is people coming in the name of Christ who have a powerful enough message and strong enough signs and wonders that if we're not close to God, if we don't know the Word of God, if we don't have the understanding, we will be fooled. We have been a part of God's family, of His calling for too long to be deceived in the end times. So these are going to be people actually claiming to be Christ, or at least His prophets, but we're going to have an easy test. We can see the signs. We can see all the wonderful works that they're going to be doing. But if we listen to their words and we watch their actions, it will be obvious that this is not from God. Let's drop down here in Matthew 24, verse 23. Jesus says, "Then if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'there,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect." Sometimes when we read these verses, we need to take a moment and meditate on it. Ask yourself a question. What could deceive you? What could you fall into thinking that this is of Christ? You need to be close to God because we're given a warning that we should not be deceived. Christ tells us what His return will look like. So this is something else to keep in mind, right? If someone just all of a sudden pops up and it's like, this is Jesus. Verse 27, "For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man." Jesus' return will not be a secret event that will happen without the whole world being witness to it. In fact, we're told it's going to be such an event that the armies are going to gather together to fight Him. Everyone is going to see Jesus return. There's going to be no doubt of what just happened. He's not going to just suddenly come on the scene without great visual clues that it happened. Plus, we know there are some wonderful events that are going to take place at the return of Jesus Christ, right? We're going to be turned into spirit beings and meet Him in the sky. Christ continued with other signs that will take place marking the end of the age. Let's go on here, back up to Matthew 24, starting in verse 6. This is after Christ warned of the false religions. He says, "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." Wars happen. This is Satan's world. And there's absolutely no doubt that Satan is the one in control because we just cannot get along with one another. Mankind has been at war since mankind was created. Verse 7, "For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of sorrows." That's just the beginning. We need to be aware that big things are going to happen. Big scary things are going to happen. And they're going to be happening all around us. It's going to be a worldwide event. "Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake." You know what? People are going to hate you sometimes no matter what you do. So if they're going to hate us, it might as well be for a good reason, and that's Jesus Christ's name's sake, because we cling to the truth, because we do what we know is right, because we follow the example set by Jesus Christ. And then many will be offended, verse 10, will betray one another and will hate one another. Do we have the love for each other? Would we betray someone to save our own skin? And really, that's all you would be saving is your skin. There's a great reward for those who cling to the truth, who live that truth. Verse 11, then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Mankind's love has been growing cold for a long time. There was a time when neighborhoods were neighborhoods, where people cared about each other or looked out for each other. The world is moving away from that. This should be a safe place to come and feel loved, feel looked out for, feel cared about, because out in the world, it's not as common as it used to be, and it's going to get worse. Verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. We've got a work to do. It's been our commission since Jesus Christ was on the earth to get this gospel out to the world. Is that going to put us in the spotlight? Is that going to bring us places where physically we may not want to be? Yeah. But the reward is great. How much do we want to get the word of Christ out to the world? We should feel very proud that God is working with us and is allowing us to support the work even that goes out to the world. That has been an effort of the church ever since Christ was on the earth, to get that message out. And we can look back at the apostles who took that message to a lot of places where that message was not welcome. And they suffered for it. But again, we're going to suffer in this world anyway. Why not suffer for something worth suffering for? If we look at all these events, a type of these events have been with us since the beginning of time. There's always wars. There's always people who hate God's word, hates God's people. People are cruel and mean. So the question is, will we know when these things ramp up to end-time status? Scripture does reveal certain conditions that will deteriorate as the end of the age draws near. We need to be careful not to confuse the conditions we see around us with the specific final period prophesied in the Bible. The final days of this era will be marked by specific prophetic events. We're given this information so that we don't just confuse general world troubles with actual end-time events. That's why Jesus spent so much time telling us what to watch for. One unmistakable end-time event will be the coming domination of Jerusalem by Gentiles, the non-Israelites. This has been a goal of the neighbors of Israel since its beginning. Let's turn over to Luke chapter 21. This is definitely something Jesus says that we should be looking for. Luke 21, starting at verse 20. Again, the words of Jesus while he was on earth. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its destruction is near. So at some point, we're going to see great armies amassed at Jerusalem's borders, ready to make a strike against that city. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. It's not going to be a time to think, oh, this is a good time to visit Jerusalem. It's a time to get out. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. Verse 23, but woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. For there will be great distress in the land and the wrath upon his people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive to all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. The book of Revelation, an angel reveals to the Apostle John some more information about this. Revelation 11 and verse 12. We read, Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. Jerusalem's going to be overrun for 3.5 years by the Gentiles. That's why we get a little bit more attentive when things start happening around Israel, right? Doesn't that perk you up just a little bit when you hear Israel's under attack? It makes you think a little bit. And it should. We should be paying attention. Israel is key to end-time events. It has been the goal of their enemies to destroy them. Thankfully, the Israelis know how to fight and have done a very good job of it over the years, protecting themselves, defending themselves. But the time is coming when they will be overrun by their enemies. Another thing to look for is the rise of a system that the Bible calls Babylon the Great. Babylon the Great. It is going to be the final revival of the Roman Empire. The center of this coming world system is Europe. Europe's historic role as the seat of world power, along with it being the cradle of Western Christendom, are central to understanding the prophetic flow of the biblical books of Daniel and Revelation. It is very important to watch events going on in Europe. And it's not easy sometimes for us to get the news of things that are going on over there, because we are so self-centered in our news and our worldview. We view everything from the lens of the United States, and there's big things happening in the countries over there that will one day affect us. Over the centuries, Europe nurtured the union of political, economic, and religious power that centered on the combination of the Roman Catholic papacy and the political realm called the Holy Roman Empire. They control everything: politics, business, and religion. It's all brought under one convenient roof where they have control of everything the people do. This church-state union throughout history has risen and fallen, continually reinventing itself each time. We read of the final rise of this power in the book of Revelation. Let's go back to Revelation 13. Revelation 13, starting in verse 3. Again, to really understand events, we have to let the Bible interpret itself. We have to go back and forth between Matthew and Revelation and Daniel and all the other minor prophets and realize exactly what it is that's going on in the world and what it is we should be watching for. Revelation 13, verse 3, And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. The nation of Europe has taken a great downfall from places where it was in past times. It does look mortally wounded, and has from time to time, but the time is coming when it's going to be healed, and the world's going to marvel at it. They're going to look at this group of people and think, they really got their act together. Look at them rise. So they worshiped the dragon, verse 4, and who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And he was given a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months, another period of 3.5 years. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority was given over every tribe, tongue, and nation. This end-time empire is going to have complete control over all the earth. This, of course, means the end of the great blessings promised to Abraham's descendants, including the United States and Britain. Those blessings were promised. They were also conditional upon our relationship with God, our continued relationship with God. And just like ancient Israel, we let that relationship falter. We turn to other things besides the true God. There will also be, as we read earlier in the book of Matthew, a time of intense persecution against God's people. In the book of Revelation, John sees a vision in which some of God's people, depicted as a woman, are sheltered from Satan's persecution and nourished for 3.5 years, the same 3.5-year period that all this stuff is going on in the world. Revelation 12, starting in verse 13. Revelation 12, verse 13. Now, when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. So this persecution has been going on since Satan was thrown back to the earth. He's always persecuted God's people. He doesn't like us. He doesn't like what we stand for. He doesn't like what we believe. He doesn't like how we live our life. He doesn't like us. He is our enemy. So Satan's persecuted God's people since the beginning of time, but at this time, some of those who are called are going to escape the persecution that comes at the end of the age. Verse 14, but the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for a time, times and half a time, 3.5 years again, from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth opened up, and the woman and the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed up the flood which he, the dragon, had spewed out of his mouth. Satan's not going to be able to persecute this woman, which is God's chosen people. So he's going to try to destroy them with supernatural control over the forces of the earth. But God's going to protect them. This is going to be a very dramatic escape, not at all unlike Israel leaving Egypt. The woman will have no doubt that God was in control of this supernatural escape, taking them to a place of safety. Verse 17, and the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Not all are going to escape. Some are going to have to prove themselves during this 3.5 years of tribulation. Why is that? I don't know. Maybe some people are riding the fence Maybe some people aren't truly committing themselves to this way of life. They know this way of life, they know what they should do, but it's just not that important. It's a nice way to live when it's convenient. But furious at not being able to attack those that God takes to a place of safety, Satan's going to make war with those who remain and resist the great system of Babylon and keep the commandments of God and live a life that follows the example set by Jesus Christ. There's a coming 3.5-year period of worldwide distress so terrifying and threatening to human survival that God will never allow it to happen again. These prophecies help us to understand the conditions and the events that will be present in the end time. So could we be living in the end times? Are we there yet? Has it started? Things could definitely be shaping up for end time events. There's wars going on right now, of course, including one with Israel. Geopolitical balances are shifting. The United States and Britain, recipients of the greatest blessings of any nation who ever existed, is forgetting God, pushing God out every way that they can. There are those who want to remove God from our nation on every level. And at some point, they're going to get their wish. And God's going to remove from us His divine blessings and protection. Our economy, the driving force behind any nation, is literally a house of cards. Actually, a house of cards might even be a little more stable. I read this morning that 70% of our currency is held by foreign governments. And there is a movement underway to create a new system specifically meant to challenge and even devalue the American dollar. And if another system could rise up that everyone would buy into and they could release all the American money that they have at one time, we're sunk. Our influence is gone. Our power is gone. And again, these things, these could happen overnight. We need to be aware. Religion is under attack as the world moves quickly to normalize behavior that is against the will of God. And how do the churches stand up to these attacks on God's way of life? Many of the world's churches are changing their beliefs. They are beginning to accept what the world is trying to normalize so as to continue their existence. They're giving in. Right and wrong is no longer defined by the Word of God, but rather by the will of man. Man decides what's right. Man decides what's wrong. And throughout history, anytime man has been given that choice, it is the opposite of what God says is right and wrong. Freedom of speech, especially concerned with religion, is becoming more and more scrutinized and under attack. I have talked to some of our ministers in Canada who say they cannot preach against certain things in their church. it's considered hate speech in Canada. There are certain things they cannot say for fear of arrest, fines. It's just totally against the law. So yes, we could very well be headed into the beginning of end times. But we still don't know when it is. We have no concept of exactly when it's going to be. But we're told to watch. That is our job. To watch. Mark 13, verse 32. Mark 13, verse 32. If you don't believe me that we don't know when the end time is, let's listen to what Jesus had to say about it. Mark 13, verse 32. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. At this time, Jesus Christ himself did not know when the end of times were coming. So if you ever thought Jesus should have just put something in there, he didn't know. Only God knew at that time. But then he tells us, take heed, watch and pray, for you do not know when the time is. It is like a man going to a far country who left his house and gave authority to his servants and to each his work, and commanded the doorkeeper to watch. Watch therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, in the evening, at midnight, at the crowing of the rooster, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. Again, what I say to you, watch. We do not want to be found sleeping. We cannot be lulled to sleep by the way the world is going. We can't just take things in and think, well, I thought this would be a destruction of the world, but it didn't happen. And we need to constantly be alert and to be watching. These things are going to happen. Are they going to happen in our lifetime? Maybe. I will say there are times when I look at the world and I think, this can't go on much longer. But as I mentioned, I'm sure the apostles thought the same things when they came to Christ and said, what's the sign of your second coming? And that was over 2,000 years ago. Now, I don't think we have 2,000 years left for sure. Jesus' words were just, watch. Pay attention. This means that we're to watch world events because God didn't give us all these insights into end-time events for us not to pay any attention to what's going on in the world around us. Those are check posts for us to be watching. But that's not all that we're supposed to be watching. Let's go back to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, and we'll pick up where we left off there. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, starting in verse 6, Paul writes here, therefore let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. Watch and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk are drunk at night. But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and the helmet, the hope of salvation. It is important to watch world events because that shows us where we are at times. It also, it helps us to see and to really take in the evil that is in this world. It helps us to understand that Satan's way leads to absolutely nothing but death and destruction. We do need to focus on world events from time to time. We do need to look at what the world is accepting and how people are living their lives and how they're treating each other. Be aware of the love growing cold in this world. But it's also important for us as Christians to watch ourselves, to watch who we are, to look at our attitudes and our relationships with each other, and our relationship especially with God. Are we building that relationship? Is it first priority to us? I want to go back to a verse that I skipped over earlier, back in Matthew 24. Jesus Christ, in his description of end-time events, gave us an idea of what we should be doing to prepare for this time of unprecedented troubles. Matthew 24, verse 13. Jesus says, "But he who endures to the end shall be saved." That's Jesus talking to you. We need to endure. Troubled times are going to come. Things are going to happen in our lives. We just need to endure. We need to be as Christ was, to follow his example. Jesus Christ, as a human, endured to the end. Go back and read his story again. Endurance is needed for our spiritual success. We need to endure no matter what the trials or how much suffering or grief we have to go through. Being a Christian doesn't necessarily mean your life is going to be full of trials and tribulation. In fact, if we follow God's way of life, it leads to success. But you got to remember, we have an enemy. Satan hates you. He wants you to fail. Enduring means a Christian would, even under severe trials, still follow God's way of life and obey his commandments no matter what the situation. No matter where you are, no matter who's around you, you are consistently the same person. When we endure, we honor God. It also lets us learn lessons that trials may teach. We don't like to admit it, but many times if we look at the trials that we're going through and the things that we have to endure, we put ourselves there. It's our own fault. Why should we expect God to miraculously deliver us from everything? What we need to do is when we put ourselves in a bad place is to learn lessons from it, that we don't repeat it, that we can help others. Enduring shows God that his way matters to us. If God sees that we remain faithful at our weakest point, at our lowest times, doesn't that mean that he can have confidence that we will always be faithful, especially in his kingdom when things are perfect around us? Won't he then know, this person loves my way of life? Sometimes we need to think, what is my focus? What do I focus on in this world? Is it the end-time prophecies? Are we worried about how things will play out? Will I be persecuted? Will I be arrested? Again, speaking to the church of Philadelphia, Christ made a promise to the faithful. Revelation 3, verse 10, because you have kept my command to persevere, to endure, I will also keep you from the hour of trial which shall come upon the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth. That promise of safety is there. But we've got to be doing our part. Jesus here was talking about protection from end-time events. We should not sit around worrying about the state of the world. We should be watching the state of the world, for sure. Looking at it, being knowledgeable about what's going on. But what we should be worrying about is, am I living up to my calling? Am I the person God wants me to be? Am I setting the right examples? Am I living the right life? Am I doing the things that I should be doing? Am I living a life of honesty? Let's turn over to Ephesians 4, starting in verse 1. Ephesians 4, we'll be reading verse 1 through 3. We read, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long-suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. That's the calling with which we were called. That is how we are to be living our lives. So yeah, big things are going to happen in the world. Big scary things are going to happen. Some will just be the course of life happening, just man going about his usual business of fighting each other, of hating each other, of destroying neighbors. But at some point, these events are going to turn into full-on end events. We've been warned about them. We've been told what to watch for. So we need to be aware of the events that are going on around us. We need to be aware of what's happening in Europe. What's happening with China? What's going on with Israel? How's the United States financial situation this week? But more importantly, how's my relationship with God? How am I following the example set by Jesus Christ? How am I showing love in my life? We need to be walking worthy of the calling with which we have been called.